Welcome, everyone, to the Shift with CJ podcast. Today on the podcast, we're going to dive deep into the realm of healing, transformation, and the incredible power of our human mind and our body. As always, my name is CJ, and I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to bring to you a special guest today. Our guest on the show is not just a healer, he's a beacon of hope for anyone who's suffering from chronic pain. And he has a unique gift where he's on this mission to get rid of other people's struggles, to bring in things like joy, gratitude, boundless energy into people's lives. So, are you ready to unlock those secrets? Joining today on the Shift with CJ podcast is Joshua Cameron. Joshua, welcome to the show.
Oh man, hey, that was a great introduction. I love that. You can talk about me all day long if you want. But
It sounds good.
yeah, hey, I really appreciate you holding the space, right? I think this will be a great conversation.
I'm looking forward to this conversation and thank you for joining us. So, Joshua, with most of the people that I've interviewed on the show and most of the people that I meet in life, when they go deep into something, it's normally a consequence of something that has happened in their own personal life. So, tell us a bit about your life and how did you get to this point where you're now helping others.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, you're right. Usually what is that ball and chain that's dragging, behind us is ultimately what we can alchemize to become, our greatest strength, right? Our greatest weakness becomes our greatest strength. And, I was born into a family that didn't really know love. There's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of violence, a lot of verbal violence, a lot of physical violence. And it made me feel like I was unworthy. It made me feel like I deserved, the damaging words, the damaging fists, right? The abuse that I got. And it taught me not to trust myself, right? Because every time I turn around, I'd be basically told that I was stupid. So anytime I have a thought, I'd be told I was stupid. So it put me in a place where I collected what I called evidence that, my intuition was tied to a bunch of stupidity. That was a really hard way to live because then it'd be like, I'd effectively be in a place where, CJ, tell me who I am. And
Mhm.
that's a hard way to live, right? Because we're the one who lives inside of our own skin, right? We're the ones who should know the most about ourselves. And if we're looking to others to tell us who we are, well, that's a big warning sign. I wasn't, aware enough to realize that. And so, I didn't want to be a loser. As I was growing up, everyone's saying, "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "Hey, I want to be a marine biologist." People would be like, "Pfft, that's dumb. You ain't gonna make any money doing that."
Mhm.
Uh, well, I guess I'm out. I guess I'm out of ideas. And so my brother and his wife were in the army at the time. And then it was, "What are you going to do when you grow up, Josh? Join the army. What are you going to do when you grow up, Josh? Join the army. What are you going to do when you grow up, Josh? Join the army." It's like, well, I guess I'll join the army.
Mhm.
So I did at 19, and it certainly had some, some ups. Certainly had a lot of downs. And 8 days before September 11th happened, here in the U.S. For those who I'm sure you're aware, but if you aren't, September 11th there were planes that crashed into the Twin Towers in New York. We then mobilized the military as a way to wage war against Afghanistan. Pretty sad, pretty gross event, and the way that we responded. But I went to my first war zone 8 days after that happened, so that was really strange, right? It was the largest attack that's ever happened on U.S. soil, and then less than a year later, after I got back, went to Kuwait and Iraq, which again was another gross, overreaction by the U.S., and unjustified war, but so it's the soldiers are also victims as well as the civilians, right, really. And that was hard for me. I worked in a hospital, saw a lot of things I couldn't unsee. And I ended up getting married twice, ruined both those marriages because I didn't, again, I didn't know who I was. And so here I was, racked with abuse, racked with PTSD. And so I came to the world as basically a half circle. And there's this movie, that Tom Cruise is in, and it's called Jerry Maguire. And this part where he sees this woman he's in love with and says, "You complete me," as if he's a half circle, she's a half circle, and together they make a full circle. But what I realized is that if you're a half circle and somebody else is a half circle, the best you can ever be is two half circles. Because the second that that other half circle no longer is contributing to, what you expect of them, well, there's gonna be a lot of resentment and a lot of animosity. And if we don't know who we are, well, we're not really gonna have the wherewithal to be able to deal with that. And, being somebody who effectively was still just a hurt little kid inside a grown man's body caused a lot of problems. And, eventually, I was working in a hospital and, worked in, various hospitals around the US as well as, in the military. And, for about 12 years, worked in pediatric medical research, and the pandemic happened. And I already had, I've been studying philosophy for decades. And so I saw the great power of Plato, of Nietzsche, of Aristotle, of, you know, um, Ken Wilber, Cornel West, and, Jordan Peterson. And then when the pandemic happened is when I really got thrust into a spiritual path. And that's where everything clicked, right? Because the philosophy was all about the power of the mind and how brilliant the mind can be by using logic, is from what I saw. The spiritual path showed me that when you quiet the mind and you tune into the truth of the heart, well, the heart connects to the soul, and the soul is what's can connect to that infinite awareness, infinite intelligence. And when that happens, well, then things start to get a little weird, because then you start to tap into energies and abilities that you didn't even know existed. And that happened pretty rapidly for me. There's this idea of by Carl Jung, the famous,
Hmm.
psychologist, and the lower the hell, the higher the heaven. Almost like you are a slingshot, and as a slingshot, you're being pulled back and pulled back and pulled back and pulled back. And the further back you're pulled, well, once you release, well, you're going to rock it off. And so, if you are in a terrible place for a long time, you might find that the second you release that, everything starts changing rapidly. And it certainly did for me. And that's really the start of me really walking into these abilities without really understanding what I was doing, who I was attracting to my life. And, they say, when the student is ready, the master will appear. And I had two of them appear in order to help guide me.
Hmm. That's impressive, and that's like a very interesting story. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's while you were saying this, I was going to ask you, did any masters show up in your life? And you answered it yourself. Because I think when you're on this sort of a journey and when you have all of these doors open up to you, it can be very overwhelming. And I know that you have been in difficult situations in the past, but when the whole spiritual world opens up and you're not ready for it, maybe philosophy can give you like a little bit of beginner's course into it. But then once these things start happening, and you mentioned abilities, yeah, it for anyone who's listening, it could sound very spooky in a way. So when you talk about abilities, can you define for us what abilities?
Um, Under for me, what I was tapping into was the intuition, right? Intuition, something I blocked out for so long, and there was a truth that was waiting for me to discover, and it started by me creating my highest ideal of goodness, of
Mhm.
which I can conceive, and uh, I opened myself up to this idea of is there room for God in my life? Right? Because at the time I was an atheist, right? Maybe
Mhm.
agnostic at best. And I'd been listening to Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist,
Mhm.
and he'd been secularizing Genesis. And that made so much sense, right? As a philosophy nerd, it made too much sense. And the fact that the Bible isn't meant to be taken literally, the Bible is meant to be taken as this, amazing philosophical construct of these oral traditions that have been handed down from, time immemorial. That's just now able to be, written down. And when I heard that, that's when I was like, okay, there's something brilliant there. I love that idea. I love that, this is all about how do we become better, right? Throughout the ages, how do we then teach, others, teach our
Mhm.
culture in order to become better? And from that space, I asked myself, well, is there room for God in my life? And once I did that, within about 2 weeks, I had a vision. I was pumped in my head of a podium. And that podium led me to speaking in front of a church, which was like, well, how? How am I going to do that? I'm an
Mhm.
atheist. I'm just going to walk into a church and say, hey, I got a download from heaven and I'm supposed to
Yeah.
share with you guys. And, but the how is none of our business. But when it comes to a spiritual path, it's all about the taking inspired action. Right? When we have inspiration, we take inspired action. The how is none of our business. We just keep that intention. And
Mhm.
as we keep that intention, we let go of the importance. We let go of the need to make it happen, and we allow it to happen. Right? Much of a kind of a flow state. Right? Like Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching might describe. And once I did that, I really started fellowshipping with a lot of Mormons. I was very free with them that I didn't agree with the LDS dogma. I didn't agree
Mhm.
with their doctrine. I wasn't rude about it, but I
Mhm.
let them know that, hey, I'm an outsider here, clearly. But I wanted to create a bridge between the secular world and the religious world, and by me doing that, I became more spiritual than I even knew like was possible. And when that started happening, I didn't really know what to do with it. And then poof, here comes Sadhguru into my life.
Mhm.
And then Sadhguru really, helped me understand, a lot of things through his book, Inner Engineering.
Okay.
So I started meditating a lot. I started following a lot of his advice.
Mhm.
And then poof, Sadhguru led me to my great mentor, Peter Sage. And
Okay.
Peter Sage, are you familiar with the name?
Peter Sage, no. Sadhguru,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So Peter Sage, he's a serial entrepreneur, taught me all about consciousness, taught me all about neuroscience, taught me about the physics of consciousness. And it blew
Interesting.
my mind. Yeah, it blew my mind. And then he led me to the great master healer who taught me how to heal. And, so I guess I've had multiple people
Mhm.
pop into my life, but Sadhguru and like Jordan Peterson, I found on YouTube.
Yep.
Peter Sage and Ed Stracher, I paid handsome sums of money in
Mhm.
order to teach me, because I learned that it's not what we learn, it's who we learn it from. And that's what changes everything.
I completely agree. I think that I need to note this down. It's not what we learn, it's who we learn from. That makes such a big difference. And oftentimes, most of people who are listening to this, including myself, have faced so many situations in our lives, and we always think that we're smart enough to figure it out because we're using our intellect and our intellectual mind, thinking that it's at the top. But there are things which are outside of our intellect. It's outside of what makes sense. Sometimes there are things that don't make sense. In fact, nothing in the world actually makes sense. Most of us, we're trying to put sense into it, and we're trying to analyze things and cut things down. But when you look at the bigger picture, no one really knows what's going on. At its best, we're assuming a few things. So what we like to do is to put our intellect and try to solve things ourselves, because of course we're then the ego comes in and you think you can do everything by yourself. But here's a thing that I want everyone who's listening to understand. Most of the times there are situations in your life which you're not ready for. Yes, you can get ready for them, but it's a great idea to raise up your hand and ask for help, whether it's going to YouTube and looking at some of the work of some people, whether it's going to a trainer, a healer, because chances are they have been through that situation. Your situation might be a bit unique, but they can give you a little bit of pointers or tips, and that just makes the struggle much less. And we want to keep figuring out. I see this a lot, especially a lot around Dubai and Western societies, modern cities, that people just want to do everything themselves. And gone are the days where we have had traditions where we've lived in villages and in tribes, and every time you have a question you go and ask someone in the tribe, and there's a leader or there's an elder, and then they pass on the elder wisdom. And that's how societies have been growing. But now I think at best we're talking to chat gpt or something else. But this is an interesting thing. So we speak about healing, and in one of your, one of the main themes of your work is looking at chronic pain and how chronic pain enters your body. Now, you've been in the military, I've been doing sports all my life, and we know that there's physical pain. You get hit, it hurts, could stay for a long time. But I want you to talk about this other sort of a pain that can come from maybe things like unresolved trauma, because a lot of people don't think about that sort of pain. We only think like, oh, I just hit myself, and like for me, I had an ankle lock this morning in jiu-jitsu and it's hurting. But if it stays for a very long time, it might be something else. Who knows? So elaborate if you can share some light on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you raised a really interesting point before that. You know, my path may be unique, but what's not unique are the emotions I felt. Right? Whether you're dealing with PTSD because of what I went through, or childhood abuse because of what I went through, well, I guarantee at some point we all felt like a scared little kid. At some point we all felt trapped. At some point we all felt powerless. Right? We all felt like our agency was stripped from us. We all felt like our life was falling apart at some point. And so, my feelings were not unique at all. And that's, again, even though we might run into, a mentor or somebody who can help us through a path, and their story is unique to ours, the feelings are universal. Now, as far as, ankle lock, for instance, right? So you get an ankle lock, and, you know, it's going to suck for a little bit, and that's going to be expected, right? That's how that's the body's way of knowing, or letting you know, like, hey, there's something not right going on. And what's your natural response? To tap out. Okay,
Hmm.
that's enough, right? And now, if that pain persists, well, a lot of times it can actually start from, as I was mentioned before, right? I learned to not trust myself. I learned to look at myself as stupid, as an idiot, as somebody worthless. And, if we go back to the 1920s, right, there are incredible great scientists, right? You got Albert Einstein, you got Niels Bohr, you got Max Planck, right? And so Max Planck, what did he say, right? This is a physicist, right? This is a quantum physicist that said consciousness is primary. He said literally everything is consciousness. Everything that we're dealing with is consciousness, is a result of consciousness. They prove that what we call physical matter reality, my hat, your headphones, my glasses, right, our bodies, are nothing more than waves of light in the quantum universe that get collapsed into particle matter reality. Which means that, as Einstein said, everything is energy. As Niels Bohr said, everything that we call real is made up of things that cannot be regarded as real. Okay, so now we've got this idea that what we see is not at all what's actually true. Like you said, nothing really makes sense. When does
Hmm.
that make sense to the mind? We're like, oh yeah, of course it's a collapse light. Of course we live in some level of a hologram. Duh, right? No, that doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
Um, but now that we understand that everything's energy and we can quantify that and prove that, well, and if everything's consciousness, well then, what I found, the model of the world that I found is that everything has a spirit, right? Your ankle has a spirit. And so what happens if you tap out because you think your ankle is weak, and you start talking to yourself like, "Oh, stupid ankle. Oh, this is worthless ankle. I can't believe that this ankle gave out. Oh, man. Oh, I'm so stupid. I'm so weak. Oh, I can't believe I did that." Well, what sort of signals do you think that you're sending and cascading throughout the spirit of your entire body, specifically your ankle? And so when we beat ourselves up, what happens is we start creating blocks. And since everything's energy, well, let's look at water. Water is a great example of pure energy, right? It's hydrogen and oxygen. That's it. If water quits flowing, well, what does it do? It stagnates.
Hmm.
And if water's stagnating, what does it attract? Mosquitoes, parasites, right? Viruses, bacteria. And what do? Well, they drain the lifeblood or they poison the lifeblood. What does that do? Well, it breaks down the body. Well, then if you go a dimension higher, well, then you've got that in the mind, right? And this can happen when you block the flow. Well, this can happen with, abuse, right? Trauma, PTSD, dealing with somebody, maybe, narcissistic abuse. And then you go a dimension higher, well, then you've got the soul. And, nobody knows the truth of the capital T. So this is the map, right?
Hmm.
And the map of the world is, again, that in the spiritual realm, you've got these parasites, you've got these mosquitoes, you've got this bacteria, these viruses. And when the spirit is being drained, when the soul is being drained, well, the soul is in the superset. The body and the mind are in the subset, which means that if what is the governing agent of the mind and body is being drained, well, then the mind and body will break down as a natural consequence. But if what is the governing agent of the mind and body is at full power, Well, then the mind and body will heal as a natural consequence, which means that you should expect that if your soul's at full strength, once that ankle lock is let go and you've walked it off, it's probably going to feel at least okay, unless that dude was a real jerk to you. And,
Mhm.
or maybe you just try to tough it out and you stretch the tendon a little bit too far. But the body knows how to heal itself. When it doesn't heal itself, it's because something is actively blocking it. And pain is a way for your body to send a signal, just like a dash, just like a light on the dash of a car that says, warning, there's something not right. Go check your engine, oil low, high temp, right? Something's not right. And your body doesn't communicate in words, right? Your body communicates in feelings and emotions. And so when we are feeling guilt, that's usually tied to something that's causing, some sort of block. When we're feeling shame, when we're feeling anger, same thing. When we're feeling pain, same thing. And if we tune into that pain, yeah, the persistent pain that doesn't go away, we might actually find that some memories actually start coming up. And if we start pulling on the thread of those memories, we might actually start finding the root cause and the ability in order to, how to take care of it. Now, that said, we may not have the power to be able to take care of it. We may not have the power to heal our soul. But if we open ourselves up to it and we see it's there, and then we ask ourselves better questions, right? So often, like you said, we stick in the realm of the mind, and the mind is so convinced that answers are what's important. Well, an answer, unearned is near meaningless. How does
Mhm.
an unearned answer really help anyone? But a question, on the other hand, will open up a path. And when it opens up a path, right? And that question could be, how do I get better at jujitsu? Well, by rolling with people, right? By actually grappling, by actually, doing the moves. And as you do that, well, then you become stronger. But if you just get an answer, hey, how do I, if you say, hey, I'd like to be better at jujitsu, what is an armbar? Okay, well, now I know what an armbar is, but I haven't actually learned the discipline of how to do it. I actually haven't learned how to roll with somebody and get them and manipulate their body into such a way to where then I can maybe, flip, some sort of reverse on them and catch them in an armbar in order to actually, understand, how does this work to my advantage? And so if we ask ourselves better questions, right? Questions are the steering wheel of the mind. And so if we steer our mind in a better question, okay, so now I understand this memory is being housed in my ankle. I may not understand why, but this memory is creating a block in my ankle, and my ankle is really sucking right now. Who can help me? Okay, well, maybe you don't have a who. Okay, well, how can I get help? Right? And just throw that out. Meditate on that. How can I get help for my ankle? And you'll find that the quantum realm will at some point collapse that light wave, that potential. And you might see, for me, when I met Peter Sage, it was a YouTube, ad. I never heard of the guy in my life.
Mhm.
Started watching this YouTube ad, and there was something that just resonated in the deepest part of who I am. And I moved forward, started talking to him, and then I understood. Okay, well, this is why. Because everything that he was telling me just made so much sense. Everything he was telling me was filling in all the holes, that the intellect couldn't fill, but the heart could. Because the heart is the true source of our power. It's what taps into our soul. The intellect is what traps. It's what confuses, right? It's what gets it's quite weak, and so often, coming back to Niels Bohr, when we allow ourselves to get confused, we often give up. And Niels Bohr, his son reached out to him and said, "Hey, Dad, right? I've been studying this quantum mechanics, this quantum physics, and it's quite confusing. I don't get it. What gives?" And Niels Bohr responded to him, "Well, son, you're not thinking. You're just being logical." And so often we stick in a frame of logic thinking that that's all there is, as if the right side of our brain doesn't exist. And the left side of the brain is the only part that exists, as if we cut half our brain off, somehow we're whole. That doesn't make sense, right? But
Yeah.
we so often act in these counterintuitive ways and don't really pull back to be like, hey, is there a better way?
Mhm. True. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a very elaborate answer, and it everyone who's listening, if I was you, I would even start taking notes, because what wisdom he's sharing is worth revisiting. But I completely agree with you. Everything that we're seeing in this physical reality is a manifestation of lights and particles collapsing in something, which in the Indian tradition, we've had a word for it for thousands of years. The word is called Maya, which means illusion.
Yeah.
And the illusion which our minds perceive, and we think it to be the end all be all, but no, it's just an illusion set for you. And sometimes it's a good thing because it allows you to stay in the boundaries um, of sanity, because some people cross that boundaries of sanity and they go insane, unless and until you're guided and you've had something which is coming up naturally, something within you that wants to expand and wants to tap into that quantum resonance or quantum field. But there are people who just try everything without any guidance, and then they get, it's too much for them. Another thing you mentioned, yes, correct. When we speak to ourselves negatively, I think all of us have done it, and it affects us really badly. You mentioned water, and there was also a famous research from Dr. Emoto from Japan, where he took 2 cups of water, and he would love and say words of appreciation to one, and the other one he would just abuse, or wouldn't pay any attention. And literally, when they froze the water, the shape changes every time. What the one that has been ignored and which has been abused has like a crappy shape. And people who are listening to this, they can YouTube this as well. Why? Because water also holds a lot of memory. Energetically, it holds a lot of things. So your body is same 78%, last time I checked, of your body was water. So if you are communicating something, you're going to hold a lot of memory, not just in your mind, but in your cells, in your energetic patterns, in your soul level. There, in the Indian culture, they say that there are different types of bodies. There are different, like 5 different types of bodies, from your food body to your mind having another kind of framework of body, than your physical body, then your astral body, your causal body. There's so many of those things, but all of those things can be affected by the way you live your life. And blocking that chi or ki or prana, this has been taken into serious considerations in like a lot of traditions. Even the Taoists and the Chinese tradition, they say that if you have pain, it's just a manifestation of some of these memories. And even to a step further, disease in the traditional Chinese medicine, if you have a liver problem that shows up later in life, or if you have like a kidney problem, that can be associated with certain kind of emotions, like anger or guilt or fear. So sometimes we're always in a certain set of emotions, and then we think that we can think whatever and it's not going to affect us because it's just happening inside of us. Actually, that affects you more than everyone or anything else. More than doing the physical stuff, is like the internal thing that keeps on building on and on and on. Another thing you mentioned, which you had from the beginning, were these negative thoughts. So it's not that clear, everyone, but to make it to make it simple, we're just going to classify them into negative or positive, but they go beyond that. So if someone who's listening to this and they have these negative thoughts in their heads, they're not good enough, the ankle is shitty, you know the day isn't good, someone's picking on me, and all of these things which are lower vibrations, so they don't allow you to enhance your own vibration. What would be your suggestion for those, suggestion for those guys?
Mm, that's a great question. Well, one thing that can help is if you go to my webpage,
Mhm.
freemefrompains.com. I've got a free gift there that you can download, and a lot of people have a hard time meditating.
Mhm.
And so I've got a series of 4 meditations there, where one of them, and they're all relatively short. The very first one goes into the benefits of meditation, how it works, why it works. And then I go through a very basic meditation in order to train your mind on how to meditate, in order to help you understand that it's not about having no thoughts. It's about not following your thoughts and just observing and stepping back and observing your thoughts. And then I start building them out to tap you into more of the, what might be considered, magical, meditations. And outside of that, there's little, tools that maybe you can use, from the mind. right? Because the mind is quite powerful. And little tools that we can use are, how can I be my own friend?
Mm-hmm.
There's enough people beating that. There's enough people in the world that would be more than willing to beat you up, right? You don't need to be one too, right? So if you feel like you are your own worst enemy, which my frame of reference is an American, right? So I can't really speak from authentic place
Yeah.
about anybody else anywhere else in the world. But as an American, it is incredibly normal to feel like we're our own worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And even that language, I'm my own worst enemy. Well, what did Jesus say? I am the way, the life, and the truth. Well, what if there was a word missing there? And what if the word was is? I am is the way, the truth, and the life. And we say I am. Well, what happened when Moses said I am? I come in the from he who was known as I am. Well, he shook an entire nation. He changed the map of the world. And
Mm-hmm.
whether we agree with that or not, right? And we can certainly look at it as a parable, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be looked at as as actual history. But if we look at it, from that place, well, then we'll find that I am is actually the language of the soul. And so often people say, I am diabetic.
Mm-hmm.
I am arthritic, right? I am, and they're invoking the power of their soul, and then they go ahead and subscribe to themselves or prescribe to themselves a limiting belief.
Mm-hmm.
And what is a limiting belief? Well, it's a block. And what does a block do? Well, it stagnates energy. And what does stagnant energy invite? Well, it invites lower vibrational beings, mosquitoes, parasites, bacteria. And so, how can you befriend your great I am? And start little, right? If you may not feel authentic if you say, "Hey, I am amazing," right? That might be like, "Well, man, I don't feel amazing,"
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you might find some incongruencies. So what if you just say, "I'm not as bad as I've been treating myself"? Okay, and start with little steps, right? If you got a 13 step stairway, you don't go from the first step to the top step, right? You take a couple, you go progressively, and do that as well. Move up progressively, and see how you can treat yourself a little bit better, and then the next day maybe a little bit better, the next day maybe a little bit better, and then just get to a point where you can start actually authentically speaking to yourself from a place of value, because it's so easy to speak to ourselves worse than we'd ever allow anybody else to speak to us. And that is terrible, because you can't escape. This goes with you everywhere you go. And if you can't quiet the noise in here, well, now you just have this demon that's basically riding your back. That's just poking you everywhere you go.
Mm-hmm.
Every mean thing, that everything that you see as stupid or dumb, it's just going to poke you. Oh, look how stupid you are. Look how dumb you are. Don't give that demon any more power. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, start taking action on, again, what can I say to be slightly less? If I feel completely miserable worm, well, what's above a miserable worm? Okay, a slightly less miserable worm. All right, I feel like a slightly less miserable worm today. And again, just start building it up, and just build it up to the point where you can actually start feeling authentic and get to a place of meditation. Because being able to meditate will transform anyone's life. And the reason why is, well, I used to work in medical data analytics, and there's this idea that you have to quiet the noise to increase the signal. Any sort of large data set, you have to quiet the noise, because you're going to have all sorts of data, and
Mm-hmm.
not all that data is relevant. In fact, probably most of it is not relevant.
Yeah.
And the signal is what's relevant, right? And where's the signal? Well, you don't really know if all you have is a bunch of static. And if we start quieting the noise of the mind that's convinced of its own brilliance, the mind that thinks that the logical frame of the world, the left brain, is the only way to exist, well, then we'll tap into what Einstein said was the true mark of intelligence, which is imagination. Because when we allow ourselves to imagine, well, guess what? The brain doesn't know the difference. Right? If we put ourselves in a place of, say I want to buy a house, right? And there's a dream house that I have. And I start putting myself in the space of the next day after signing the paperwork for that house. The brain doesn't know the difference. And so that's really how the law of attraction starts working too. And Neville Goddard talked about this. If you're familiar with Neville Goddard, that
Mm,
feeling is the secret. So he was
mm,
a 20th century mystic, and broke down the Bible in a way that was empowering rather than a way of this about a bunch of rules to follow, right? That disempower, but a way to find that limitless self. And if we put ourselves in a space of feeling amazing, right? Whether that's buying a house, whether that's winning a jujitsu championship, whether that's asking a girl out, our brain doesn't know the difference. You close your eyes and you beat yourself up, your brain doesn't know the difference. You close your eyes and you feel amazing, your brain doesn't know the difference. And so you can actually literally start to train yourself to become a different type of person and create neural pathways in your brain to help you think in different ways, to help you transform into a different phase of life simply by using your imagination. And that's what Einstein said is a true mark of intelligence. One of the most brilliant people to ever live said that
mm.
imagination is intelligence.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I know that there are multiple studies being done on violin players, and like a lot of different studies where people, one set of group have been asked to play an instrument or, doing the actual physical thing. And the other group of people were just told to imagine that they were doing it and like feel it every day. And results for the both the groups were the same, and they tapped into the same Hebb's law where neurons that wire together fire together. So they were constantly rewiring their neural pathways to match the same as they were doing the moment outside. So this isn't woo woo thing. If anyone who's listening, yep, gone are the days where we could have said that, hey, try this and this works. Now we can quantify it. You can actually open PubMed or go to any research paper and look at the research, look at what's been actually duplicated, where with of course millions of dollars, what people have been saying in the past all the time, like Einstein, people before them, they have been talking about, just think about doing it, or just imagine doing it, or just feel doing it, bring the feeling inside, like Joshua mentioned. And also, and here's another question that I want to ask you, because this is the biggest confusion that I see within people. There is a big set of people that say, okay, their affirmations, either wake up in the morning, tell yourself, I'm going to be rich, I'm here, I'm there, I'm going to get the girl of my dreams, I'm going to get the job of my dreams, but they never feel it.
Mm.
So what's your take on affirmations, your personal take? Do they work, do they not work, or and what do you see people doing wrong or right?
I think affirmations can work,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that they always will work, and they may work against us in some ways because if we don't feel the feeling, for instance, if we affirm to ourselves that we're a millionaire, or mine might be like, well, bro, you looked at the bank lately, right? And and so what happens is it creates a negative feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that negative feeling do? Well, it manifests that, it draws that, it attracts that. And so the important thing is, what would it feel like if I were a millionaire?
Mm-hmm.
And start to imagine that and start to think upon that and ponder upon that. What would it feel like to me if I were a millionaire? And don't think of the money, right? Because the heart doesn't care. The heart doesn't understand money,
Mm-hmm.
right? The brain understands money. Think about, what would you do if you were a millionaire, right? Who would you help? How would you contribute? How would you be, connected more to your community? How would you give love back to those that you love, right? How would you share that wealth? How good would you feel by doing that? And put yourself in that space and then say, I'm a millionaire. And
Mm-hmm.
it may not happen overnight. For instance, when we are tapping into the law of attraction, right, we may not just get a suitcase full of money that's going to drop in our lap. But what may happen is, and I'll share with you an anecdote from my own life. I was on the Entangled podcast by this, great gentleman, Jordan Euclid. Well, after I was done, he said, "Hey, man, if you are ever in Denver, let me know." Sweet, sounds good. I don't know the next time I'll ever be in Denver, but and then I was part of a coaching program. And when that coaching program got to the end, They said, hey, we've never done this before ever in our lives. But what we want to do is we want to give everyone a free access to a workshop that costs $5,000 to get to. It's like, okay, well, I just manifested a 5K gift. Well,
Mhm.
that wasn't money in my wallet, but it was 5K of value. And where you have to go in order to be part of this workshop is either Miami or Denver.
Sweet.
Oh, yeah. So I reached out to Jordan, say, hey, man, I'm actually going to be in Denver, and he said, great, dude, I'll go ahead and, you're more than welcome to stay in my guest bedroom. Okay. Well, so now I don't have to get a hotel. Okay. Well, that's cool. So then I show up to Denver and, there is, a friend of mine who lives in Boulder, very meaningful to me. She's my accountability partner. And, I, love her to death and been really wanting to meet her. Well, then the opportunity presented itself there. So that was the other value in my life. And then when I was at the workshop, right, when the first day of the workshop was ending, and I was about ready to go back to Jordan's place, well, I get a text from him. Like right as I was about ready to start leaving, I get a text from him because synchronicities are awesome. And that text said, hey, I'm actually at a friend's house. You should stop by. Okay, well, that's perfect timing. I guess I will.
Mhm.
Let's see where this breadcrumb leads me. So it leads me to a lady who's got Lyme disease, right? His friend. Okay. So she needs, help. Even says, hey, I'm very interested in what you do. I'd love to maybe work with you. Hmm. Okay. So then, I was talking to her. I was like, she doesn't really have a whole lot of money, but she's got a network of people, whole network of people that could use a whole lot of help.
Mhm.
Okay. So is there a way for us to trade value for value? What if I took her through some healing sessions and she in turn is a living example and of what I can do and is also a raving fan. And within a few days, she's already got, 3 people who are very interested in working with me. Okay. So I didn't get a suitcase full of cash that dropped in my lap, but I have all these things that are adding up to abundance into my life. And so often we demand abundance can only be something that walks into my front door. Well, what if it wants to come down the chimney? What if it
Mhm.
wants to come through the back door? What if it wants to come through a window? And if we demand it can only come in one way, well, we block ourselves from ever seeing it. And there's what's called the reticular activating system, which is part of the mind that we can train to look for these things, train to look for these synchronicities. And it's almost like a bouncer in front of a club. And if there's something that doesn't need to be in our awareness, that bouncer will look at the clipboard and be like, "Hey, you ain't on the guest list, bro. Get out of here." Right? And a good example of that can be, imagine you drive to work every day and you drive on your path, don't really pay attention to a lot of the shops on the way to work, but then one day your kid says, hey, daddy, hey mommy, I'd really like a bike for my birthday. And the very next day you're driving to work, oh my god, what happens to be there? A bike shop on
Mhm.
your way to work. What? Wait, did that just get built? Did that just appear overnight? No, it just had no reason to be in your awareness. But since your reticular activating system is like, oh, bikes are important to me now, you're now looking for bikes to be important. And if we train ourselves to see abundance as more than just money, we'll start to see other things come into our life. And when we are grateful for those, well, then more things will compound and more things will compound because what we give gratitude for, well, we're going to get, more back. What we put energy into, we're going to energize.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a fantastic example. Thank you for sharing that. It's funny because I like to tell people the same example. I like to tell people, like, if you wanted to buy a car and you set your eyes on, let's say, a Jeep, and then the next day when you're driving, you're going to see Jeeps everywhere. They were always there, like you mentioned, but our brain has this unique ability of, at any given time we have about 11 million bits of information around us, and our brain can only grab around 25 bits. So it has to filter through a lot of things. That's why a lot of people these days are self-proclaimed ADD and ADHD, but basically you're just having too much of information in your brain. It's just trying to scatter those up. And by using this technique that Joshua mentioned, everyone, you can actually invite all of those things into your life, and that's super exciting because all you had to do was to be a bit more conscious. And one other thing that I see around Joshua is that a lot of people will have a lot of these synchronicities in their life, a lot of this magical things happening, but they just don't notice it. I mean, sometimes there are other people who have to come to them and tell them that, because they're not in a negative rut, but their lens on reality is a little bit different, and they're just picking up on all the negative things. But there are all these great things that are happening, which they never kind of like connect. And thank you for mentioning gratitude, because once our minds, unless you have trained them quite a lot, or you grew up in a family where you've learned to have a different lens on reality, we have a higher chance of a negative bias. So that means every time we look at into a situation, our and the way our mind is that the information goes through the emotional processing part of our brain, the amygdala, and then it goes to the more logical sides of our brain, like the prefrontal cortex. So your emotion, fear, mostly fear, will take the information first, and you're going to see the negative in things before you start seeing the positive. But if you get stuck in that, then you never allow for the thing to show you the positive side. And gratitude is that magical thing, because most of the times, because we're bombarded with information, we're designed to forget the good things, but we're designed to remember the bad things. So even if something great has happened to you in the morning, chances are in the evening you're not even going to remember about it, because the brain is designed to do this until and unless you bring in this extra step of being grateful, and maybe writing down what you're grateful for, or really feeling, bringing taking one step ahead, and going and telling someone, like an accountability partner or your friend, and telling them that, hey, this is something really great that happened in my life and I'm really grateful for it. This is how you train your mind to now start looking for things which actually make you grateful. So I love it. Thanks for sharing that. I think this is such a fantastic thing that all the listeners can take and they can incorporate in their lives today. So we spoke about negative emotions. Let's talk about some positive ones, or like a little bit higher vibration. Whenever I see people, and people who've got a lot of wisdom, people who have tapped into spirituality, they're never very serious. You can see people, it maybe it comes with age as well, but people start getting a bit more lighter perspective on life, maybe because they think it's an illusion, maybe they think things are in a cycle, they're going to come and go, emotions are going to come and go, but they always have a much more lighter aspect to life. But when you have a more serious aspect to life, when you're taking things too personally, too seriously, that puts you in a lower vibration. Now, what I see is people who have a good sense of humor, people who laugh at everything, people who just want to like shake it off, and just they're smiling at everything. They have mu- even situations, better situations happen to them, and they're in this positive mood. So, do you want to talk to us about some of these positive emotions, and maybe how can we bring that into our life? Should we all go for stand-up comedy, or what what should we do to become a bit lighter?
So, what started going through my mind is there's this parable of, the Buddha,
Mhm.
and he, went to a town to go speak. And as he's speaking and he's sharing his thoughts, there's somebody in the crowd who's just mad. And he's just berating the Buddha and he's yelling at the Buddha, and the Buddha pays him zero attention, doesn't even acknowledge his presence.
Mhm.
This guy's still yelling, Buddha doesn't pay any mind. Then after everything's done, right, this guy goes up to the Buddha and is like, hey, what's going on? I was sitting there yelling at you. I'm so angry. I've been calling you all these names. You didn't even respond. And the Buddha said, if you try to give a gift to somebody and they refuse it, whose gift is it really? And
Mhm.
the guy said, well, I guess it's mine. Exactly. Exactly. And so the thing is just because you are laughing things off, just because you're in a higher vibrational state, doesn't mean that only good things happen.
Mhm.
Really shitty things can happen. But guess what? When we build a wall around ourselves because we are afraid of the bad things happening, a wall doesn't discriminate. A wall doesn't know, oh, that's a good thing. Let me go ahead and let the wall down and let these good things in. And so when we build these walls around our heart, around our mind, because we're so afraid of being hurt, we're blocking the good too. And so often, the world works in a non-linear capacity, right? There's no such thing as a straight line except in the mind of a human. And if you truly think that a straight line truly is the shortest distance between, 2 points, get in your car and drive to the grocery store in a straight line and see how well that works. Right? Driving through people's
Mhm.
houses, through their fences, and
Yeah.
get out of the way. Right. And
Getting caught
so,
on the way.
yeah, exactly. And so if you look at a river, well, what does a river do? Well, it winds. And if we understand that we are actually on the right river, and if we quit fighting the stream and quit, trying to swim upstream, but instead give into the flow and start tuning into, maybe it's Taoism, maybe it's Buddhism, right? I certainly love Tao, the Tao Te Ching. And we start allowing life to happen and receive the world instead of demand that it better show up through that front door, but
Mhm.
receive it as it is. Well, even, great philosophers have known that being that lighthearted person is the way to go, right? If you look at Friedrich Nietzsche, right, he was a very serious person, but he understood that the vast majority of people are just lost and they're just trying to survive. And then of the people who want to start following the path of the Ubermensch, right, the psychologically superpowered person, well, the first stage is the camel. Well, the camel is the martyr stage, and martyrs don't live very long. Hence martyrdom, right? And so what does the camel do? Well, who was so noble that they'd be willing to bend the knee and to go ahead and saddle themselves with all the woes of the world? CJ, it looks like you got some real problems. Let me go ahead and take those from you,
From you.
and you can put them on my back. Well, guess what? There's no shortage of people that be, oh, sweet. Let me go ahead and load that onto you, right? And then what happens to that camel? Well, its legs start trembling and it collapses, and then it dies, gets crushed by all those burdens.
Mhm.
Well, the next phase is the lion, and so there's the cultural dragon, right? That basically is what demands that, oh, if you're going to be a good person, you better do that. Look at that person hurting. Well, you better go ahead and take that from them. And the lion, when the dragon says, thou shalt, the lion says, no, I will. I
Mhm.
will my own path. Now, when we demand that the cultural dragon is wrong and we are that we can prove our own path, well, that right there is a little bit of swimming upstream, right? Because we're fighting that dragon constantly. And then the path of the psychologically superhuman, right?
Mhm.
We might look at this as um Superman, right? Some super huge strong Hercules, but no, it's that of the mind of a child, somebody who just laughs things off. Oh, look at that, I was building a block tower and it fell apart. Huh.
Mhm.
Look at that, I had some expectations and didn't go the way that I expected. Oh, well, that's funny. Well, what do you mean that's funny? Isn't it important for you to make sure that this manifests in your life? Well, maybe it's more important that I live a good life, and then if I know I'm in the right river, and I know that the river's taking me to my destination, and I know that eventually my destination is going to be on the right side, and the river winds left. Well, okay, well, it's nonlinear. I can't see around that bend in the river,
Mhm.
but chances are that river's going to take me somewhere that I didn't expect. It's going to show me something that I didn't expect, and it might actually give me a gift if I keep my vibrations high enough. And if we are feeling those negative emotions, well, we feel heavy because we're more particle, right? We're vibrating at a much lower frequency. But if we're feeling joy, we're feeling love, we're feeling inspiration, we're feeling gratitude, well, now we're much more wave, and we feel much lighter, and we feel much more airy. We feel like things can't really hold us down, right? Like we're just like skipping across the ground. And I think that's the important understanding, is that somebody who falls into a pile of shit and comes out shining like a diamond, well, that's not on accident, right? That's not just a happy accident. That's because of the way that they look at the world.
Mhm.
And they look for, okay, how can this be a value in my life? Rather than like, oh, this again. Oh my God, why does this always happen to me? And if we understand that the universe is self-reflective, right? If consciousness is everything,
Mhm.
and if we ask the question, why does this always happen to me? The only possible answer we can get is, oh, this is why. Oh, here's also why. Here's also why. Oh, why am I such an idiot? Oh, here's why. Oh, here's another reason why. Here's also why. But if we start asking better questions, hey, I know I just fell into this pile of dog crap, but how could this be a benefit for me? Well, I don't know. Maybe somebody saw you and they'll reach out and be like, hey, I feel so bad. Let's go ahead and get you taken care of. Maybe that
Mhm.
person can actually start, has something to benefit, for you. Maybe they've got some wisdom. Maybe they can show you something. Maybe they're cute, right? Maybe you'll start a relationship, right? Maybe they were looking for somebody who could deal with, something, emotionally disturbing and not freak out like a little boy. Because
Mhm.
women, you know what? Women don't like boys. They like men.
Mhm.
And, people who are brittle and break easily don't make for good partners. And so if we allow ourselves to be as that of a child that just laughs things off, oh well, it happens. Let's deal with it.
Yeah, and these people also have this unique ability of seeing things as they are. Because what I notice is when I talk to people, and there are multiple communication exercises based on this principle as well, you could tell a story to five people in the room, and if you kind of take away either the way they're interpreting words, or you have some noise in the room, everyone's going to interpret that story and going to think about it in a different way. So we all have our preconceived notions, our things that have happened, things would have happened till like age 7. Our psychological and subconscious mind sees things differently. But when you can be in that awareness and then consciousness and have all of these things in the back of your mind and see things exactly as they are, that changes the game for most people. Where you don't bring your own biases in, you don't bring, for example, for you or for someone else, I grew up as an obese kid, so I always had this voice in my head and people telling me, oh, you're so fat, you're never going to be good, all of that stuff. But when I look at situations and that voice comes in my head, that's going to change the complete situation. Maybe the situation wasn't even that. And most of the times we always think we have this magic crystal ball, especially when it comes to others, because we always assume what people are thinking. But the reality is, no one gives a shit. No one's even thinking about
Yeah.
they're not, in your 20s, you keep on thinking, oh, everyone's thinking about me. In your 30s or 40s, you're just like, oh, these guys, I should have done this. As you get older, there's a quote on this. I cannot remember who mentioned this, but as you get older, you realize like no one was looking in the first place, and you just made all these stories, and you're suffering in your head. It's like you said in the beginning, if you can self sabotage yourself, like if you and me are sitting in a room and I'm suffering, I can pass the blame on you. Be like, it's Joshua. Every time I sit with this guy, I feel crazy. If you're sitting by yourself, man, definitely you're in bad company. So you need
Yeah.
to make sure that you change. And Joshua, really, like this conversation has been so amazing. But I want to go ahead and ask you. So, for example, if you start and you've worked with so many people from all over the world, what's a typical process of healing look for you? Does
Mm.
it start off with inquiring about the person? Do you give the person a few exercises like meditation, the miracle healing system? How does, if someone comes to you, what does the whole process look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I do talk to them. I find out what's going on. Now the more story we put into it, typically the harder it is to let it go. Right. Because then there's also a lot of what are called secondary gains. Right. So if I start
Mhm.
talking about how miserable my life is, I expect other people to come and share love with me. Like, there, Joshua. It's
Mhm.
okay. There's the connection I was looking for. Right.
Mhm.
And the same way that a kid acts out in order to get attention from their parents.
Mhm.
Right. They're still getting attention, whether it's from a negative source or a positive source. They're still getting the attention they wanted. And so there's a lot of things called secondary gains. And so it's important for people to understand that, do they truly want to get to heal? Do they truly even believe that they can heal? Right? Because no matter how powerful or how talented I am as a healer, who do you think your body's going to listen to? Me or you?
Yourself.
Yeah. And so I also like to find out who do they, who do they really love, right? Is there, typically I like to invoke powerful imagery. A lot of times that's going to come in the form of babies, puppies, or kittens, right? And there's a guy I'm working with right now who's got muscular dystrophy. And within days of working with him, right? Normally, like he wakes up, his neck is fine, but by the end of the day, his head's like hanging. It's really hard for him to keep his head up. And within days of working with him, well, his neck's just fine now. And had cats, that he loved, just loved them. So I bring in that powerful imagery because love is what heals, right? Love and opening ourselves up to love, right? That's the language of the soul. The soul wants to love. And when we allow ourselves to love, well, that's what starts cascading into healing. And it's all about quieting the mind, right? And so when I'm working with somebody, I can actually tune in and find out if their mind's active. And so I'll guide them on exercises that they can do, what they can tune into to allow their mind to just relax, allow their mind just to flatline at that zero, so their heart can take hold. And I use a lot of words, and I use a lot of philosophy, and I use a lot of language to describe the healing process and kind of what we've been going through and what we've been talking about for the last hour. But words can only be as the traditional Buddhist metaphor of a finger pointing to the moon. If you focus on the finger, you ain't going to see the moon. And that's why it's important to understand that, right? The feeling is the secret. Again, Neville Goddard. And when I get somebody to that place of their mind being still, their heart is open, and it just swells with love, well, then I guide them on what to do. I connect them to, different, healing energies from heaven and from earth. I connect them to different powerful imagery. I connect them to, again, if we live in a hologram, well, I connect them to very powerful symbols that they can create that'll then magnify that energy, that'll then purify that energy, that'll then cascade that energy through every part of their body. And then I get them to start visualizing what they want and concentrate on what they want. And then, I even worked with a lady from South Africa, and she had a torn tendon in her bicep. Right, so I'm sure that you hang around enough, people who do martial arts or sports, you're going to find people with some messed up tendons. Well, hers was from her husband was wasting away in a nursing care facility, and he weighed about 100 pounds more than her. And the nursing staff didn't take care of him. So she'd have to go and take care of him and roll him over and try to lift him up, and end up tearing her tendon. And it got to the point where even just trying to reach out her car window, in order to, to grab like a parking ticket, a parking validation to park in a parking lot. She said it literally would bring her to her knees. She couldn't reach above her head to a cupboard because the same thing would bring her to her knees. How much extreme pain. She went to a orthopedic surgeon, didn't help. Went to a chiropractor, didn't help. Went to, physio, didn't help. Went to about 7 different specialists, and she said the only thing they did is make it worse. It just made it more painful. I worked with her. I took her through a meditation. Within 4 days, she could reach out that car window with no pain. She could reach up to her cupboard with no pain. And within 4 days, she'd had this problem for years. Within 4 days, she had 30% more movement in her arm. 30%. Within 3 weeks, she had 70% more movement in her arm. I've never heard of anything in the medical system that can do that. Because medical is more worried about chemistry. What pill can we give you? And chemistry is a lower vibration. But if we think in terms of frequency, well, frequency beats chemistry every time over time, hands down. And so I really help people tap into the right frequencies and to quiet the mind so the heart and the soul, which know, or they know the truth. And so you'll literally feel, I've had people tell me, I didn't realize I could physically feel the energy. Yeah, that's right. Blew my mind too. When I first started getting trained by the great master Ed Stracher, who's, spent a lot of time in the Philippines as well as in Thailand. His I believe his godson, Eddie Jr. even lives in Thailand. I'm not sure which part though, but he's known as Eddie Healing Jr. if I recall. And they as I was learning from them, right, physically feeling the energy throughout my body, like holy crap, right. And when you physically feel it, well, that's a great way for the brain to be like, oh, okay, I get it, this is a real thing. This is
Mm,
an absolutely real thing. And that's what makes it a lot easier for the left brain. So I usually use all these words, I use all this philosophy just so the left brain can be like, oh, okay, I kind of see how this works. I don't quite get it yet. Well, of course you don't, because you haven't experienced it yet. Right?
mhm,
We can talk about jumping out of an airplane, but you'll never know what it's like until you jump out of an airplane. Right. Yeah, and so the mind is a defense mechanism. If it doesn't feel safe, it's going to be looking all around and it's be active all day long. And the mind is meant to be an antenna. An antenna for what? The heart. Right? The heart's got about 40,000 neurons in it. And the heart is constantly sending signals to the brain. The brain almost never sends any signals to the heart. And so
mm,
but what happens when the mind's so convinced of its brilliance, it closes off the circuitry that allows it to be an efficient antenna. Or if you want to look at the river metaphor, a rudder, right? And the
mhm,
heart is the motor. And since we live in a fractal universe, well, we can look at, okay, well, are there other things in the universe that would show this exact same type of relationship? Well, look at a planet, right? The brain's full of all the electrical, the electricity, and the heart is full of all the magnetism. Okay,
mm.
well, let's look at the atmosphere of Jupiter. Well, that's where all the electrical storms are. But guess how many of those electrical storms exit the atmosphere of Jupiter?
Zero.
Big old goose egg. But the magnetosphere that's created from its core, its heart, well, it extends beyond the asteroid belt. It extends beyond Mars. It actually reaches Earth's orbit.
Wow. Even I think the heart's magnetic um, magnetic range is about 5,000 times more powerful than the brain's. Right, so our hearts can actually communicate magnetically. This is also one of the reasons why you come into a room and probably you don't know the person, but if they're I mean, some people call it aura, some people call it their magnetic sphere, but it's so strong that you can feel a person's emotion. You can feel if it's the right person to talk to or not. And it even happens with horses. If you're nervous around the horse's HRV and their magnetic field will turn to match yours. That's why some people can just go and they're confident, and the horse doesn't give them any trouble. And some people are just a little bit scared, and then the horse goes crazy because we're and that's internally made. We just need to tap into it. You just need to be aware of it, practice, like we said, maybe get some gratitude, and you can tap into these fields. So, wow, that's interesting. And another question: do you have to be with this person that you're healing, or can it be done remote? I know the answer, but I want it for the
Yeah,
listeners.
no, I appreciate the question. And just real quick before I answer that, again, the feeling is the secret. Why? Because the law of attraction, well, it is magnetic.
Hmm.
So it means it comes from the heart, not the mind, which is why you're supposed to feel that. Because when you're feeling it, well, guess what? You're going to start to take inspired action. And words are about a hundred times more powerful than thoughts alone. And so actions are going to be even more powerful than just words. But as far as do I have to be with somebody? No, it's all done over Zoom, right?
Hmm.
Because it's all non-local, right? Energy doesn't, non-locality, right? We've got, quantum entanglement. All I have to do is just tune in, and I don't have to be there at all. I mean, I've worked with people in New Zealand, South Africa, Malaysia,
Hmm.
all across the U.S., Canada, and across 5 different, Germany, uh, you know, um, England, so across 5 different continents. And that's the amazing thing here is that you know there are things such as energy healing, right? Like Reiki, and typically that takes somebody to be present there, and you actually have to
Hmm.
put your hands on them. And the most amazing thing is that you can feel the energy, probably more powerful than you've ever felt anything in your life. And I might be 5, 6, 7,000 miles away.
Hmm. Okay, perfect. This is good for everyone to clearly understand. Well, Joshua, thank you for coming on the show. It's been an amazing time. We could go on talking for hours because I think we can both vibe in the same frequency. Maybe we should do a part two of this. We'll see what the listeners feel like, and probably we'll do another one. But my last question to you before I let you go, because I know it's quite late there and I want to be mindful of your time. Uh, if you had a time machine, or let's say you could go back in time, meet your younger self, if knowing everything that you know right now, if you could give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Mm.
I'm sure there are many pieces of advice going through your head.
So I guess the first thing that pops in my head is it's kind of silly,
Hmm.
but there's a song from the movie Lyle Lyle Crocodile, and it's "Look at us now," right?
Hmm.
Even as the world is falling apart, well, look at us now. Look at the way that you know what we did it. We made it.
Hmm.
It's okay. Just relax. Don't take things so seriously, right? And I don't know the first the if I could only say one thing and I blipped out of existence, that's so hard to say, but it'd be something along those lines, right? And yeah, so that's a hard one, right? Because then you say, well, there's this, but then I'd like to say that, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's a real rabbit hole to jump down.
No, but this is good enough. Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people who are listening, especially the younger ones, need to listen to this because we live in a culture and a society where we're go 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 and we're like robots. But you know what, guys? In the end of it all, if you've taken something from this conversation, just know that don't take yourself so seriously.
Mm,
Don't put unnecessary pressure onto yourself. The world is going to tell you to do a lot of things. Yeah, sometimes you got to listen, but don't let the world affect you. Be that company that is going to make you happy, make you joyful, make you energetic. And like Joshua mentioned, you're not a half, you're a full. You came to this world already being a full. Yeah, the culture, the society, your parents, they might have like disturbed that a little bit, but in the end, when you want to find your true self, it'll always be there. So don't take yourself so seriously. Joshua, thank you so much for coming to this website. Thank you for creating so many. Thank you for actually healing so many people. Thank you for creating all of these different concepts in your own way. Of course, they were there, but like sharing it in a profound way where you make it so simple and so interesting. And what's your website again so people can download the gift?
oh yeah, I appreciate that. So it's freemefrompains.com.
Okay.
So pains is plural, and yeah, download the free gift. And look, I wasn't born this way, right? And also I'm nobody special, right? It's not like I'm more special than CJ, or even that CJ is more special than me, right? I'm just a regular person. And as far as, don't take life so seriously, I kind of want to come back to just real quick if I can,
Of
a
course.
point that you made, earlier about how most people don't care. 80% of the people don't care about your problems, no matter how much you might be crying about them. 80% of the people don't care, and 20% of the people are happy you have them. And when
Nice.
you realize that, it liberates you because then you can let go of the burden of needing to talk about that. And because any physicist or neuroscientist will tell you that the mind attracts that which it dwells upon. So download that free gift, dwell upon healing, and see how your life will start to transform.
Yep. And you can get in touch with Joshua from there. He works with people from all over the world, so you don't have to be next to him. It's not this what we're talking about is non-local, non-physical in nature. So Joshua, thank you so much for coming onto this show. I really appreciate you. And I'll tell you this, if you're ever in Dubai, so now you can manifest this, let me know and I would love to have a coffee with you and hang out.
Oh, that'd be awesome, man. Yeah, I'll definitely let you know. Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome. And this is your host, CJ, signing out from the Shift with CJ podcast. I hope you had a lot of fun, just like I did on today's podcast. Have a great day. Have a great week. Have a great lifetime, because you're complete. I'll see you in the next podcast.